In this video, I'm going to be making this 6-foot console table. It has a couple really cool features, and we'll get into those in just a bit. But I made it out of sycamore that my buddy brought me from Tennessee. He came down to visit. That's him right there. Jason, thanks for the sycamore. It turned out beautiful. He has a buddy that has a sawmill, and he gets a lot of choice lumber from that dude. And this is quarter sawn sycamore, and we'll get some close-ups of the grain at the end of the video, and it came out really nice. Right now I'm getting it's all rough sawn, so right now I'm getting some pieces ready just to glue together to make the base. So I'm just going to get one side flat on the joiner, and we'll glue those pieces together and get them in clamps and set them off to the side. You know, I'm not milling up the rest of the board right now because I want to get them all glued up, and then in case they don't glue up perfectly flat, you know, I'm just doing that inside face, and then we'll come back later after we get them out of clamps and go through the joiner and the planer and get these guys flat and square. And you know, the base is going to obviously consist of 4 legs. We'll have 2 long aprons and 3 short aprons. And you'll see how all that comes together here in just a bit. So now I'm getting the boards milled up for the top and the shelf. So I'll run one face over the joiner, and you know, when you're running that face over the joiner, you don't want to be pushing down on it. Because you're trying to get any kind of arch or anything out of that board, and if you're pushing down on it, you're just temporarily removing that and not letting the joiner do its job. You've got to hold that board still but not press down, and that way the joiner can can flatten that board for you. And then I run one edge through the joiner after I get my face flat, and then move to the planer and get the other face flat, and then last I get to the table saw here and get that last edge flat and square to the other sides. Now I'm going to go through all these boards and pick out which ones look best beside which one and which side needs to face up. And all these boards are a little different widths, so I'm also moving them around until I get the sizes I need the top and the shelf to be. Obviously the top is going to be a little wider than the shelf. It's going to be 16 inches wide, and then the shelf will be a little skinnier. And after I get all those laid out, I'm just going to take a pencil and mark, number them all, and you mark them for the shelf or for the top. And then I'm going to go through the joiner one more time and run one board with the top facing my my fence, and then the next board over the base or the bottom is going to face the fence. And that way, if my fence isn't perfectly square, that that negates that fixes that problem. For some reason, this board I cannot seem to get straight, but I finally get it there, and we'll get these boards in clamps and get them off to the side and move back to our base. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you've seen me glue up plenty of panel clamps or panels before. I have a ton of pipe clamps over there on the wall, and I like those the best. I have some parallel clamps, and honestly not a huge fan of them. Maybe I'm just used to using the pipe clamps, but I always use these small clamps on the ends to kind of hold everything together while I get the pipe clamps tightened down, and I'll beat it with a hammer a little bit and get them all flat, and then those small clamps will come off. Obviously I glued up the shelf also, and now I'm moving back to the base. This is the next day, getting all the pieces for the base back out of clamps. And we'll start milling those up. They'll go through the joiner, the planer, the table saw, and get them all flat and square. I'm going to look at each board before I start jointing it, and you want the arch facing down. You don't want it facing up, because it's going to be too hard to hold in one place while you're going over the joiner. If you have it facing down, then the joiner can just cut off those two ends until you get it flat. And there I am emptying that stupid thing again. That's when you're running your joiner, your planer a lot, it gets full fast. So now I'm going through the planer, going through the table saw, and all these boards will be straight and square and flat, and we'll be ready to start making our base. Now I'm going to put a 10-degree angle on all these pieces. This is going to be one of the legs, and I'm going to start with putting just a 10-degree angle on the bottom of it. Now I know I want my leg to be 32.5 inches tall, so I'm just putting a drywall square on here and going up to 32.5. That way I don't have to figure any funky angle. I have the angle cut on the bottom of my leg. I put the drywall square up against it, and then just go up 32.5 from there and make a little mark. And once I've got that first one marked and set up on the miter saw, I can pull my stop block over and then cut my other three legs just up against that stop block. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my apron. I'm going to lay my legs out here where I want them. And once I get them all set up right where I want them, then I'll just measure across the top of those and figure out how long my apron needs to be. And it's going to get the 10-degree angle on either end of it also. And we're going to put this together. I'm going to put this together with mortise and tenon. And I actually, that's one of the first mistakes I make on here. I've got a couple of mistakes in this build, and that's one of them. My mortise and tenons don't work out quite right, and I'll show you what happens with that and what I do to fix it. So right now, right there, I'm figuring out how much I need to cut off each cheek to make my tenons. I'm making a 3/4 inch tenon, so I'm measuring the width of the thickness of the board there, subtracting that 3/4 inch tenon, and then dividing that in half, and that's how much I'm going to take off each side for the cheeks. And that's what I'm setting up my saw blade here for. And I've just got a piece of scrap up here right now, so I can dial that in. I got it real close, and then just run it, just keep raising or lowering the blade until I get it dialed into a 3/4 inch tenon. And now that it's dialed in, I'm going to actually run the legs across there. And when you're just doing a 90 degree tenon, you can just flip that guy over and do the other side. But when you're running an angle like this, you can only do one face at a time. You got to do one face and then change the angle, which is what I'm doing right there, to the other side, and run it through again. Now I'm going to cut the ends of the tenon off at the bandsaw. I normally do that at the table saw too, but obviously with this angle that makes it a little more complicated, so I'm just going to go over the bandsaw and cut those off. And my miter gauge at the bandsaw isn't the most precise, so I'm leaving just a little bit of space there, and I'll clean that up with a chisel after I get done with this. I always like to lay it out and look at it and make sure everything's working right and it all looks good so far. Clean those faces up with the chisel. Now, what I ended up screwing up, the leg is going to come in at an angle, that 10-degree angle there, but my tenon is sticking straight out. So I'm marking for my tenon, or my mortise right now, and I'm thinking in my head there's something wrong here, but I can't quite figure it out. That's why I've got that square back out. I'm looking at it, thinking about it, and it just doesn't feel quite right. But I'm going to go ahead and cut the mortises, and then when I start putting it together, you'll see the mistake and what happens. I love my mortiser. It's an awesome machine. It's a one-trick pony. It only does that one thing, but it does it really well. So here I'm trying to hammer it together here, and it's busting out because that tenon is trying to go in there straight, but that mortise is at an angle. The mortise is technically straight, but the leg is at an angle. So that's the problem. So I'm going to fix that by cutting the top corner of my tenon off. And that ends up fixing my problem. Now I've got my dado stack set back up on my table saw, and I'm getting ready to cut a dado in my legs for this bottom shelf to set in. And I'm starting with a scrap piece. As you can see there, my first cut was a little loose, so I'm going to take that 3/32 blade off and put a 16th blade on there and see how that works out. That ends up being a little tight, and I'm going to cut it again. I'm going to put a spacer in there. My dado stack comes with three sizes of spacers. A 0.2, a 0.1, and a 0.05. And I start with putting 2.2s in there, and I go back to being too loose. I take one of them off. I'm still too loose, so I took both of those off, put a 0.1 on there, and after changing it 5 times, it comes out to be a perfect fit. So it took a little bit of time, but it was definitely worth it. I'm not going to show you all the different fits, but I will show you the last one here in just a second. So that one, still too loose. I'll take the 0.2 off and put a 0.1 on there. I almost never use those little spacers, but for this they worked perfectly. So that's a nice fit. It's almost a little tight, but I haven't sanded that down yet. Once I sand the shelf down, that's going to be perfect. So now I'm going to put those dados into my legs, and those legs are also going to get a taper on them. But you don't want to do the taper until after you've put that dado in there. Otherwise, you're gonna screw up your dado. So after I've got my dado on there, now I'm going to put my taper in. You can see the dado on there. I always use a belt sander to get my my panels cleaned up. Any inconsistencies in my glue up, and just cleaning the glue squeeze out on there. Now we'll get this base glued together. After I cut that little corner off, it went right together. You see that little wedge I'm putting right there. I put one of those on both sides, and that's so I can clamp it up with that angle. I'm just going to put a pipe clamp on the top and the bottom. Alright, this is the next day. I've got them back out of clamps, and I'm doing a test fit here. And what I'm going to try and figure out here is how wide my shelf needs to be. Right now it's oversized, and my top is going to be 16 inches, and I want a slide overhang on both sides. I think I wanted my base to be like 14.5 wide. So I've put this together and measured where it is right now, and figured out how much I needed to cut off of there to have my base the right width. So I'm just going to take that shelf and run it through a table saw and cut off what I need to cut off. And then I'm going to put it back together and figure out what size my aprons need to be. So we'll get this thing back together, put it back in clamps, and measure again and see how wide my aprons need to be. The little short aprons are going to go across between these two. My shop is attached to our storefront, and our dog hangs out in the store all day, and she always comes through the shop to go in and out. Alright, I'm getting ready to put the big round over on the table base, but before I do that, I'm going to sand off any glue squeeze out at the joints. Otherwise my router will hop up over that, those glue joints while I'm trying to put this round over on. Now I'm going to put a little rounded end on the shelf and the top, and I thought this turned out really nice. It's a nice little feature or add-on or whatever you want to call it. I'm just using my circle jig to do this. So this is the same jig I use to make round tables. I think I've got it set up as if I'm doing a 36-inch round table, just to put a slight arc on the end of the shelf. So this is the other end of the shelf, and I don't believe I think I took out doing the top, but I did the same thing with the top. And the top was a little wider, so that arch came out just a little different, but I don't think anybody would ever notice that. I had a crack in that shelf, filled that with epoxy, and now I'm working on these are the small aprons that are going to go between the two big aprons, and I'm going to put all that together with dowels. I'm using this dowel jig to put those holes in the aprons, and then I'm going to use this block that I just put holes through as a guide to put those same holes in these long aprons. And I'm going around that with a pencil and marking where that block is, so as I'm tightening it down with the clamp, I don't move it. I've got a specific spot that I'm lining it up with. You can see that piece of wood on my drill bit that keeps me from going too deep. I've got 4 or 5 pieces of wood in my drawer over there, different widths depending on how far I'm wanting to go in. Now you see that block? I'm putting a little center line on that block, so I can line it up exactly with a center line on this table base. That way I can make sure it's in the same spot on both sides. I can line that little line up. Doing the same thing one more time. And now I'm figuring out where my shelf is going to sit. I'm going to kind of dry fit all this together and mark it. That way, when I'm doing my glue up, I'm not trying to measure and I've already got it laid out where it's going to go. So I'm lining that up, and then I'll come back and mark it with a little pencil marking. And now I'm ready to start putting this thing together. Now this is my second screw up, and I can't remember. I'm not sure exactly what I did here, but my lines from that little block, or my holes from that little block I made, do not line up with the holes I put in these little aprons. It sticks over way too far. It's hard to see in that shot, but it's way too high. So I'm gonna have to pull that back off. And I end up running them through the table saw and cutting the top off of those because, all the holes are already there. I'm ready to put this thing together. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off the top of those little aprons. And what I'm doing right now is lining those holes up and seeing what I need to cut off from between the block and the apron. After I cut that off, it worked fine. My other mistake right here is I made my dowels way too long. There's no need for them to be this long, and I had a heck of a time getting this thing seated because the dowels were just way too long. So after I went through all this hassle with this one, I cut my dowels down, and the rest of it went together a lot easier. So I finally got that sucker seated, and I'm going to go cut my dowels down real quick on the bandsaw. I'll get these other two in place. You look at those dowels and you don't think there's a whole lot to them, but having two dowels in each one of those with glue, and having glue on the ends of those boards, and then having the shelf in that dado down below, all that together makes this a very sturdy table. Those dowels are really all you need. They do an outstanding job, and it was extremely solid when I got done. So I'm gonna get that shelf in place. I get the other side on, and the base will be basically built. It's really an easy build, but it comes out looking very cool, and looks like it wasn't easy, but it really is not a bad build at all. It's not hard to do. Now, after I get all this in clamps, I'm going to turn it over, and a skinny table like this, it's very easy to get it a little off kilter to where it rocks a little bit. I don't know why, but just a long skinny table like this, it's very easy to get it a little out of square, and this ended up being a little out of square. You can see a rock there, so I'm going to clamp it down to my workbench while the glue is drying, and hopefully that takes care of it. And it does a little bit. It still had a little bit of a rock to it. Fortunately, we put adjustable feet on the bottom of all of our tables, and that's a perfect example of why it's nice to have those on there, because you can just screw one of the feet out just a little bit and get rid of that rock. Now, obviously, I spent a lot more time sanding this than what you're seeing here, but we sand to 80 grit, and then we'll come back with a wet washcloth and wet everything down and sand it again at 120, and then start putting the finish on. And you can really see this beautiful grain pop, this quarter sawn sycamore. The finish I used was Rubio Monocoat. And then I'm going to come back with the biscuit joiner and put these slots in here, and those are to attach the tabletop with, and you'll see that here in just a minute. Here are the adjustable feet I was talking about. And I'll have a link in the description for the feet and all the inserts we put in there that the feet screw into. So there's the insert right there. We've been using these same inserts for years, and they work really well for us. And then that foot just screws right into that. And I'll also have a link for these little tabletop clips that we use. We've been using the same ones of those for years too, and they work really well for us. I'll show you a close-up of what they look like right there. So that's just going to go in the slot of that biscuit joiner. It's funny, my dad gave me that biscuit joiner years ago, and I think this is the only thing I've ever used it for, is to put those slots in my table bases to attach my tabletops with. But we use it all the time. We use it on almost every single table we build. Just not for necessarily what it's intended to be used for, but works great for us to do this. And there it is. It's all done. I love how that shelf hangs between those legs right there. That's the money shot. I think that has a really nice look to it. The grain was beautiful. Jason, thanks for the wood, buddy. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to see comments down below. If there's something I could do better or do differently, I'd love to hear that down below. Thanks for watching.